Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us in this time of COVID and working from home with the virtual conference. You're never quite sure how the technology is going to work. We're doing our best. We have two of our three presenters here with us. Looks like Professor Joanne Van Wyck is running late. If she joins us, we can have her presentation at the end. But we do want to get started with our two presenters who are still here, who have joined us this morning. My name is Greg Bond. I'm the Assistant Director of the American Institute of the History of Pharmacy, one of the co-sponsors of the festival, along with the University of Wisconsin School of Pharmacy. I'm also the Senior Editor of Pharmacy and History, which we're excited to announce. The title will soon be changed to History of Pharmacy and Pharmaceuticals, beginning with the next volume in 2021. Well, welcome to day 4 of the new Social History of Pharmacy and Pharmaceuticals Festival. We're delighted to see so many of you here this morning for these two very interesting presentations. The first 3 days of the festival went very well. We had a wide range of papers on a great variety of interesting topics. And we're particularly excited for the panel this morning, panel 10, called Medicines versus Drugs, African Perspectives. We think it's particularly important to highlight the history of pharmacy and pharmaceuticals from the global south and from non-European and non-American perspectives. So we're excited to hear these papers this morning. Before we begin, some housekeeping details, which if you joined us last week, you'll probably be familiar with and you might be tired of hearing, but it's important to reiterate every panel to make sure everyone has the best experience possible. Please remember to mute your microphones when you're not speaking, and please remember to turn off your cameras to save bandwidth so everyone can see the slides and hear the presenters. Please use the chat function down in the bottom of the right of most screens, the text chat function, to ask questions of the panelists. Now, you can ask questions at any time during the presentations, but the question and answer portion of the panel will happen at the end of the presentations, after all the presentations from the speakers. And I'll be moderating the question and answers, parceling out the questions you asked to our presenters today. We'll begin the panel. I'll give brief introductions of our speakers right now, so we can get to the presentations. I'll introduce both speakers at the beginning, and then let both presentations proceed after that. So as I mentioned, it looks like one of our speakers is running late. If she joins us, I'll introduce her at before her paper. But our first speaker today will be Phumla Innocent Nkosi. She received her master's in history at the University of Johannesburg in 2019. She's worked as a researcher on a variety of very interesting looking projects, historical projects, and documentary films. She'll be speaking to us this morning about a picture of Daha, policing in mid-century South Africa, 1932 to 1960. Our second speaker this morning will be Dr. Mohammed Wada. He's a senior lecturer in the Department of History at Bayero University in Kano, Nigeria. He received his PhD in history from Bayero University. He studies medical history and the history of healthcare services in Nigeria, and he's published numerous recent articles on the topic. He'll be speaking our second paper about internal outsiders, domestic politics, and the campaign against drug abuse in Kano State, northern Nigeria, 1999 to 2015. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Phumla Nkosi for her paper about Daha policing in mid-century South Africa. Phumla, over to you.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Now okay. So I'm excited for this opportunity and excited to meet you, all of you guys, and I hope that you would enjoy my presentation. So the title of my paper is The Policing of Daha in Mid-Century South Africa. And the term Daha is a South African word referring to cannabis. Next, Kristen. So the reason I chose to focus on this period was influenced by the police file that I came across during my visit at the National Archives of South Africa in Pretoria. So this file, it had Daha cases dating from 1932 to 1960. Next, Kristen. Next. So, so these police files, Kristen, the previous slide, please. Yes. So these police files, they entailed the number of persons arrested, the amount of dacha seized, and the areas where these arrests and confiscations were made. And this was recorded on a district and provincial level. So from this data, I could establish some of the areas where I assume were the hot spots of dacha policing, and I could also establish a particular trend in the arrests. And next. In the early 1930s, as shown by the graph, it shows that in the early 1930s, there was a minimum amount of dacha seized. As you can see, going upwards to the 1940s, into the 1950s, the amount of dacha seized starts rising, as we can see. So these numbers, they continue rising more in certain areas than others. For instance, in 1955, in the Transvaal division, there was a whopping amount of over 2.5 million pounds seized, as will be shown in the next slide. Next, okay. Anyway, so this made me question the reasons behind those changes, and I found 3 interesting factors that I think had a greater impact on policing of dacha during this period. So these 3 factors are the ones that I'll be focusing on today. Number 1 is the cannabis, it's the series of laws that were prohibiting dacha. Second is the transition from colonial to apartheid law. Thirdly, it's the report of the Interdepartmental Committee on the Abuse of Dacha. So the first factor was the series of acts or laws that were introduced in the previous years, even before my period of focus, and the ones that were introduced within the mid-century. Next. So in 1922, under the Customs and Excise Act, dacha was for the first time prohibited in South Africa nationally. Although I mentioned that there were previously existing laws that prohibited dacha on provincial level before this 1922 law. So the first one, it was the Natal Law number 2 of 1870, known as the Cooley Law Consolidation, which had a section that was one of the first official attempts to regulate and prohibit dacha use in the Natal colony. It was prohibiting the smoking, use, or possession, sale, and cultivation, and it was basically directed to the Indian indentured laborers who lived in Natal and smoked hemp. And then secondly, I talk about the Orange River colony. Unlike the Natal law, this law was passed in 1903, and it was applicable to everyone and not just people of other races. So the Dacha Prohibition Ordinance 48 prohibited use, selling, and exchanging of dacha or Indian hemp to everyone in this particular colony. So should anyone not adhere to this law, he or she would be fined or be imprisoned. So this 1922 law was basically a huge change in South Africa, as it prohibited dacha nationally, and it was followed by the 1922 Pharmacy Act, which further prohibited the use and cultivation of dacha. And then ultimately in 1930, dacha was internationally prohibited, as we all know, and was listed as one of the habit-forming drugs by the League of Nations, where the South African government had played a huge role on getting cannabis to be recognized as a habit-forming drug internationally. Next. Secondly, I believe that the transition from colonial government to apartheid government had a huge impact on policing in general in South Africa. The apartheid government relied heavily on police to enforce apartheid rules, especially on black societies living in urban areas. I found that random policing for other reasons have led police on the discovery of dacha consumption and trade. So under the Natives Urban Areas Consolidation Act of 1945, police were permitted to conduct random searches in urban societies where black people lived, and the powers of search were extended to include dacha. So basically the apartheid government also, it further appointed the Interdepartmental Committee of the Abuse of Dacha to further investigate and recommend better formulas to combat the consumption and cultivation of dacha, which goes to my third factor. Next. So the Interdepartmental Committee on the Abuse of Dacha inquiry was a product of the apartheid government. This committee was said to be a follow-up to the Cape Colored Commission of 1937, which had indicated that the government was not doing enough to control dagga use. So this Cape Colored Commission, it racially targeted the colored people in the Cape as drug users. This whole commission was based on controlling dagga amongst colored communities. Therefore, this particular commission that was established in 1949 was basically a follow-up on this previous committee. It was appointed to further investigate and and come up with better recommendations for the eradication, sales, and consumptions of dagga in accordance with the Dental Mental Aid Pharmacy Act of number 13 of 1928. So the committee then later in 1952 published a report detailing all of the recommendations on how to control and regulate dagga consumptions and cultivation. So the report had many recommendations and interesting suggestions, but I only chose to focus on a few. Next. 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 So better policing, next, sorry, it's the slides. Next, oh my gosh, okay. Better policing was one of the recommendations. The committee amended the powers of search by establishing Section 71 on the Pharmacy Act of 1928 to permit policemen to search any premises or vehicles suspected of dagga without the requirement of a search warrant. Although under the Wheat Act, search without warrant was already permitted, it was also proposed that some non-European policemen from certain districts should also be given some limited power to search and record areas that were suspected of growing or possession of dagga. They suggested that they also suggested that a mobile police squad should be established to mainly focus on dagga. My slides are now messed up, sorry guys. So the second suggestion was collaborations between police and chiefs or headmen. So under the proclamations numbers 265 of 1924 and 116 of 1929, headsmen and chiefs were to be held responsible for extirpation of noxious weeds like dagga in their locations. This suggestion was that chiefs and headmen of Bantustans are African homelands, more like reserves, which where black people lived, and these were the rural areas. So the chiefs and headsmen were compelled by the law to work collaboratively with authorities by reporting any suspicions of dagga growing on the locations where they're in charge. I think the reason why they teamed up with the chiefs and headsmen of these Bantustans is because the chiefs knew the areas very well and they would easily get information. So my third point was increased remuneration for informants. So because of the secrecy of cultivation and dealers, the police needed informants to reveal information that they could not retrieve just from their own investigations. It was recommended that informants should be paid better, with the hope that they would be more eager and encouraged to provide much needed information for police to use. So better rewards would attract informants with useful and in-depth information for police. So generally within the apartheid government, informants were very important. They were one of the functions of the apartheid government for seeking political information about their position. So this was no surprise as why this was part of their recommendations. So the fourth one was heavier penalties or fines. So the committee was also against the existing penalties that were posed under the 1928 Medical, Dental and Pharmacy Act, that penalties for use, possession and trafficking were the same. So the maximum fine was initially £100 and prison sentence was a maximum of 6 months. The level of dagga penalties were not separated according to the extent at which the offense was committed. So only the court took into consideration on whether or not the person should be regarded as a user or as a dealer. So the committee did not agree with the light sentencing and penalty. They argued that these penalties should be for smokers only and there should be heavier penalties for traffickers. They suggested that the penalties had to be separated by the extent of amount found and not be the same for both users and traffickers. They suggested that the maximum fine should be £500 and the maximum sentencing should be 12 months. To the committee, this would be adequate to act or exercise a deterrent, especially in highly lucrative trading markets. So my fifth point was the shift of focus from demand to supply side. So like many other countries, the committee recommended that policing of Dacha should be focused more on the supply side and less on the demand side. They believe that if cultivation could be destroyed, then the demand would be controlled. In South Africa, the supply side was the rural areas that were poverty-stricken and compromised by the white monopoly and the economy. Rural communities cultivated Dacha as a way of life and a way of living. To them, it was and still is a way of sustenance and surviving. Statistics shows enormous amounts of Dacha seized in areas like Natal and Transvaal. Now, can we go back to the slides that have the statistics so I can explain? So as shown in the graphs, please go to slide number sorry guys. Please go to slide number 10. The one, yes, that one. The one with provincial level statistics. So this particular graph, it shows the sum of amounts seized by year and by divisions. As you can see, there's a very high spike in 1955, and that is a spike, that spike is from the Transvaal division. So this is where most of the Dacha was seized in this particular period, with over 2.5 million. And it was found that it was in the Nelspruit district, also one of the areas where African people lived. And slide number 12, please. So slide number 12, basically, it shows, this particular slide, it shows the ratios of the proportions. So the arrest data did not include information about the nature of Dacha crime allegedly committed. It didn't mention whether the crime was for possession or the crime was for dealing. So in order to gain a better understanding of the trends in the nature of Dacha crimes for which arrests took place, I reasoned that a ratio of sum of amounts seized to sum of arrests could provide some indication of this. This is an imperfect measure, since there may be many arrests for small amounts and a single arrest accounting for most of the confiscation. Yet, as a rough indicator over time, the ratio provides a sense of change over time. As seen on the previous graphs, that there is a dramatic shift in the late 1940s and in the early 1950s. From that, we can infer that until this period, the amount of Dacha seized per arrest on average was smaller than in later years. This shows either the growth of an illicit cannabis economy or a shift in policing that began to target larger scale cannabis cultivators over time. In 1950, the ratio shows an amount of close to 120 pounds per arrest, confirming that large-scale cannabis rates were more of a trend from 1950 onwards. So this shows that now in the 1950s, the police were more focused on the supply side. They were more focused on the reserve, and they were making huge amounts of seizures in this particular area, because now they've shifted away from urban areas like the Witwatersrand and the Cape. So the last slide, slide number 14. So the reason why this study matters is because I said this study matters because it offers a historical perspective on the effects of cannabis prohibition, informing the current worldwide debates about the legal status of cannabis, along with the recent steps taken by the constitutional courts in South Africa towards decriminalizing Dacha in South Africa. So in South Africa, recently in 2018 September, the Dacha ban has been lifted, permitting adults or people over the age of 18 to use Dacha in their private space, and they can only plant a limited amount of Dacha in their private space. So it shows that history matters in understanding the dynamics of the current politics and laws around Dacha. So the current government can draw a lot from this and learn a lot from this, and before even considering going into cannabis farming, this information can be very useful. Another reason why I think this particular study matters is because South Africa. It's because between 1946 and 1951, South Africa's reported seizures accounted for almost over half of the reported seizures worldwide, which shows that this matters, this information matters, and it would help with research in future. Thank you.
Well, that was excellent. Thanks for that very interesting presentation, Phumla, and thanks for rolling with the technical glitches and being able to present your material and slides a little bit out of order. We appreciate your ability to get the talk done anyway.
Thank you.
And I see Mohammed is back with us. He was able to log back in after some technical difficulties. So Mohammed, if you can unmute yourself and turn your camera on and share your slides, we can get on to your talk now.
The slide, sir?
Yep, we can hear you, we can see you. Share your slides again.
Okay. These are the slides.
They're not there yet. Hit the share button at the bottom of the meeting screen.
Okay.
All right, we can see your PowerPoint. If we can't make it to go full screen, this would be all right to go through your talk. So it's up to you whether you're trying to make it go full screen, or if we just want to start here, that would be fine too.
Okay, I've sent it. Show here on the top that it has been shared, sir.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Can you see it, sir?
Yep, we can see it. You should go ahead and start your talk.
Okay. Can I start, sir?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. I can start my presentation.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, sir. Let me begin by, first of all, saying that I'm really not in a pharmacy. I'm more of a medical historian with focus on British colonial infrastructure in northern Nigeria. My interest in this very conference was drawn because of the kind of domestic politics surrounding the issue of drug abuse and the campaign against it in northern Nigeria, particularly in Kano. Kano, for instance, is one of the states, one of the 36 states in the Federation. It is the most populous state in Nigeria, and incidentally, is the state that has been ranked as the state with the highest number of drug addicts in the country. Now, by 2013, people began to get worried about this issue, and all efforts were made to ensure that this issue is really addressed. But one of the major concerns is that addressing issue of drug abuse in Kano done effectively without looking at the sources of some of these drugs. And incidentally, it happened that the drug business, or pharmaceutical business in Kano, is more or less dominated by the internal outsider, or people I choose to refer to. It can be called. It's more or less dominated by migrant community consisting of Igbo, who I now refer to as internal outsider. Now, we cannot really understand the politics behind this issue without looking at how these people started to come and participate in drug business in Kano. It has to be noted that the Igbo were from southeastern Nigeria, and like many of their hosts, the Hausa Fulani, they are fellow compatriots within the Nigerian Federation. However, they are seen as non-indigenous settlers, stranger, migrant, or what this paper have chosen to refer to as internal outsider. Now, the application of this characterization is not confined to Igbo residing in Kano, but rather is used in describing any one of over 250 ethnic groups that have chosen to settle permanently outside their original homeland and among the indigenous people that share common identity, descent, lineage, and culture. Now, the beginning of Igbo migration and settlement in Kano is dated to the beginning of the 20th century when they arrived as part of the British West African frontier force. But then, based on colonial residential segregation policy, they were settled first in Sabongari, outside the ancient city, in what is regarded as Kano Township. Now, Igbo settlement continued throughout colonial period due to several factors, such as construction of a railway line, which facilitated free movement of people, and they arrived Kano as skilled. They arrived Kano as skilled worker, trader, entrepreneurs, and professionals. They are also employed in northern region civil service. But by the beginning of the First Republic, there was this idea of northernization policy, which was embarked upon by the regional government of northern Nigeria, which really created some setback for the Igbo. Consequently, before the outbreak of Nigerian civil war, there were a lot of problems associated with their settlement in Kano, as evident by the riot, which led to the loss of many lives, particularly on the part of these people. When the Nigerian Civil War was fought, and then it ended in 1970, the Igbo still came back to Kano, and they also went into so many enterprises, and then capitalizing on so many factors. They were in patent medicine in enterprises. Now, what really gave them a lot of advantage is the experience they were able to gather while they were in their original homeland. The Igbo had, before the end of the 1970s, able to open many medicine stores in Sabongari Market, some part of Metropolis, as well as other areas in Kano. They purchased drugs from many pharmaceutical companies, but then by this period, then there was this problems of sales of one and over-the-counter drugs. So we find amphetamines, ICD are being sold in the open market. Now, by the end of the 1970s, that is few years after their arrival, you find that there is this issue of problems of drug abuse, whereby many drugs such as seconal-lesagine, acid, amphetamine were also in the open. And this was problem of drug abuse was further aggravated by the 1979-1983 polity of the Second Republic, where politicians used drug addicts in order to score political points against their opponent. The idea of drug abuse also manifested because of the introduction of structural adjustment policy of 1986, because the policy created a lot of socio-economic and political problems, making many youth to be indulged in drug and substance abuse. This issue of drug abuse continued up to the time Nigeria returned to democratic rule in 1999. In fact, the return to democratic rule witnessed changing trajectory in drug abuse, apart from the already known drugs such as abuse drugs such as heroin, morphine, cocaine, reactivant, propolis, Valium, and many other banned drugs came to find their way in Kano, and it was abused by many people. Another dimension to this problem was the issue of abuse of codeine and cough syrup with different brand names like Emzoline, Benylin, Pescop, Tutolin, Codeine, and many others. Also, another dimension to this issue of drug abuse was also the problems of female indulging in such kind of activity. Because here you find spinters, married women, and also because of so many reasons, were also involved in drug and substance abuse, thus creating a lot of problems for the state. Now, the internal outsider or undergraduate of Kano society, because of the alarming rates a new dimension, the phenomenon of drug abuse had reached invariably drew more attention from parents and other stakeholders. Now, questions began to be asked, what are really the source of this drug? The answer by most accounts tend to be associated with uncontrolled activities of patents, medicine store, chemists, drug vendors, particularly the many of them that operate illegally or without any registration across the state, particularly in the Sabon Gari area. Sufficient attention was specifically focused on patent medicine businesses in Sabon Gari, the market run by Igbo internal outsider due to covertly retailing of drugs, including the controlled one in the open. Accusations against this internal outsider emanated due to a number of factors. In the first instance, their connection to illegal drug business was becoming no longer secret. They came to be involved in selling of controlled drugs such as pentazocine, diazepam, Lexon, morphine, and many others, which become very difficult for the state to control. Secondly, people develop more interest in the activity in respect of ban and illicit drugs because of the growing ethnic consciousness in Nigeria, Nigerian body politics, a very unfortunate development that led to ethnic and religious conflicts in the return of the civil war. This crisis, which Kano had to share for these many consequences, produce many consequences. It creates rifts, open all wounds, and allow room leading to suspicion against the activity of patent medicine entrepreneurs. Consequently, the internal outsider connection with the supply of fake and adulterated drug and other banned drugs like tramadol, codeine was seen as a ploy aimed at dragging the young people in Kano. View like the above is further reinforced by increased stereotyping of crime among Nigerians. In Nigeria, there is this problem of stereotyping crime. You find that people from one particular area are normally regarded as people that are involved in one type of crime or the other. So because of this stereotyping of crime among Nigeria, due to polarization along ethnic divide as well as global and national correction of some of the unscrupulous people among these people in drug abuse also led to people focusing attention on their activity, more especially in Sabongari market. Now, sensing the danger they face, patent medicine entrepreneurs in Sabongari led by Igbo spearheaded the formation of Nigerian Association of Patent Proprietary Medicine dealers as far back as 1992. By the time state government issued directive for the closure of Sabongari in December 2012 for the first time in order to curtail drug abuse, this organization with membership comprising some non-Igbo took lead in opposing the directive, a decision injurious to the campaign against drug abuse in the state. The monopolization of patent medicine enterprises by the internal outsiders over uncovered supply of banned drugs and antecedent of the connection of some of their kinsmen in national and global drug illicit trade, coupled with the inter-ethnic rivalry, in addition to vehement official stance of drug regulatory agencies like Pharmacy Council of Nigeria and National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, that the main source of abuse drug come from Sabongari, all combined to give some credibility to the suspicion against drug business. Such development help to open all wounds and reinforce mistrust between the migrant and their host. But the allegation against the internal outsider of deliberately dragging cattle and foreclosing IT similar practices by quite a number of Kanawa patent medicine entrepreneurs whose number is on increase remain a great obstacle in the success of the campaign against drug and substance abuse. The paper tried to show that the idea of dominating businesses, especially the patent medicine enterprises in Savangari, and the supply of banned drug, and which led to drug abuse in the state, has been a serious issue that creates friction, especially between the Igbo and their hosts. And that is what this paper has tried to address, and which many studies has not been able to do. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Hello, sir.
Thanks, Mohammed, for that very interesting presentation. Remember, for all our attendees, to ask questions of both presenters down in the chat, the text chat that I will read out and moderate for them. I'll ask Fumla to turn her camera on and Mohammed to keep his camera on, so we have both presenters up as we get some questions. Or perhaps,
Hello?
Yep, okay, perfect. Our first question in the chat is for you, Fumla, from Julie Parle. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, Julie. She says, thanks, Fumla, for the innovative work in the South African context using this new data. She asked, can you talk a little bit about how this research challenged your initial hypotheses about the history of Daha in South Africa, and were there any surprises you found during your research?
So this entire research was very challenging for me, especially working with numbers, converting those that data into statistics like graphs and all of that. It was that on its own was a challenge. But what I found very surprising about my research was that finding out that that South Africa accounted for over half of the reported cannabis seizures worldwide, and this was reported by the UN. That was shocking for me. I didn't expect it. And also statistics showing that over 2 million pounds of dagga were seized in Transvaal in Nelspruit. That was also surprising to me, because most of the literature that I've gone through keeps on flagging out the Eastern Cape and Natal as the areas of dagga cultivation. But now these police statistics have shown me that there was a large amount of pounds seized in Transvaal in mid-century South Africa, and surprisingly enough, that was not even reported in the media, you know. So for me, that was a shocking hypothesis.
Great, thanks for that answer, Pumla, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name there.
No problem, you learn. Thank you.
Question for Mohammed from Richard Del Rio. He says, thanks for the presentation. He gives his apologies for showing up a little late. He was only able to see the end of the talk and your description of the problem, Mohammed. But he wonders, could you please explain what a patent medicine is in the Nigerian context? And in terms of drug consumption, how does this problem relate to issues of consumption in relation to other drugs?
I want to make a particular reference to the area I study, that is Kano. There are quite a number of stores, and they have really dotted many, especially in the Sabongari area. In Nigeria, I have to say that many people prefer to go and buy drugs from patent medicine stores rather than going to the pharmacies to get their drug for many reasons. One of the reasons has to do with affordability. When you go to patent medicine store with little amount of money, even though the drug may not be the standard, but you can still afford it and buy it. whereby in conventional way, a pharmacy is not really expected to sell a substandard drug. And because of the level of the poverty in the country, you find that many people have no option rather than to go to many of these pattern medicine store to purchase their drug. Providing many of these pharmaceutical services, that is especially drugs, essential drugs. Coupled with there is poverty, there is incapability of the government to provide many of this drugs. So you find that people have no option. They just have to, despite all the repercussions on their health. Really answer this question.
All right, thank you, Mohammed. Your internet connection broke up a little bit there, but I think we heard most of your answer. Certainly very interesting. Another question for Pumla now from Stuart Anderson. He writes, the problem of Daha use in South Africa seems to have increased rapidly after the end of the British colonial period. What are the main factors that contributed to this increase, or was it just that better records were kept after the colonial period?
Yes, better record keeping was also one of my points. It's just that I couldn't mention it in my presentation, but I have it in my paper. I do assume that better record keeping with time was also the reason why suddenly there was a documentation of statistics. We are now starting to see the amount of arrests, the amount of pound seats. So better record keeping could have been one of the points. Basically, there are a lot of factors that we can to assume why there was a rise in the statistics over time.
Yeah, interesting question. Certainly, we might not know for sure. Interesting question here from David Hertzberg for both our panelists. He wonders, have you encountered evidence of collective or political action by drug users in response to or an attempt to alter drug control efforts by authorities? He references something along the lines of perhaps the harm reduction campaigns that Nancy Campbell talked last week. So questions about a question about political or collective action by drug users in response to the drug regulation campaigns.
I think Mohammed could take this one. I haven't come across this. The only strategies of harm reduction that I've read about are on America, Europe, nothing much in Africa or South Africa yet.
Okay. What about in the Kano context, Mohammed?
Sorry, pardon, I really couldn't get the question, sir. Sorry?
Okay. The question's about, have you encountered any evidence of collective action or political action by drug users in response to these drug control efforts?
There is also, there is, I have given a good example. When the state government here in Kano tried to impose a ban on the sale of, or rather tried to check the selling of these banned drugs, it went to the extent of people closing the whole of Savangari market where these drugs are sold in the open. But incidentally, through this organization, drug business is very lucrative business because of this lucrative nature of the business. The organization, that is the organization formed by the patent medicine store owners, they went to the extent of going to get court injunction, stopping the state government from imposing such law. And you find that here is not only the issue of internal and outsider, even those that are part and parcel of Kano society close rank because they know they have to really defend their own interests. So there is really a strong opposition against the effort made by the state government and the federal government to impose this law on regulating drug in the country. But I hope I have tried to really have answered the question.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's certainly the type of thing David is looking at. Very interesting. Another question for both panelists from Richard Del Rio again. He writes, regarding police statistics, here in the US, we handle police with careful scrutiny because of sometimes minimal oversight. What considerations are made or have you made when you're dealing with police sources or official government sources like this about problems of drugs and drug use?
I'm not sure if I'm getting the question right, but what I can say is that I questioned most of the police data because of things like corruption in South Africa, especially police corruption in South Africa. So working with police statistics, it wasn't easy because I constantly questioned the reliability of those statistics and whether or not they had some errors, or whether or not police would sometimes forge some of these statistics to show that they are at least doing their work, or they're making more arrests and more seizures around. So I question the reliability of these statistics more than anything. It is in the back of my mind, and I did write about it in my paper that these statistics may not be reliable, but they are present in the archives. But we can still question the reliability of those statistics.
Sure, absolutely. Always smart, skeptical of all sources. Any thoughts on this, Mohammed?
Honestly, I've not really presented any statistic, but I have to really confirm that getting information from police and the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency regarding this issue of fun drug has been very, very difficult. I really made several efforts to do that, but accessing them has not been quite easy. Even the local police that we have in the state, that is the HISPA board, I went there several times, but I couldn't really lay my hand on most of the statistics. Mm-hmm. What I have to rely mostly is the newspaper headings. Because some of these police officers and the other officers in some of this agency, they feel more comfortable to give their own side of the story. And by giving their own side of the story, you will not have any way of really subjecting some of this information they provided to scrutiny. So I depended more or less, if you look at the slide, you find that I was able to get some of this information through some of this newspaper report. But getting the statistic directly, honestly, it has not been quite easy.
Mm-hmm. I certainly understand that. Pumla, go ahead.
Greg?
Yep.
Yeah, may I answer the previous question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I did not come across any formal movements of harm reduction or something like that, but there are some Africans, especially the ones that their cultures were deeply rooted in cannabis use. They did show some form of resistance because they have long-standing history with using dagga, especially older men in those particular areas. They were against these laws, hence they continued with the cultivation, they continued with smoking regardless of the penalties and risks. But I don't know of any formal movements, but there were some users that were resistant to these laws.
Sure, it's very interesting. I think in a lot of places, these types of movements are informal, maybe not formal organizations, but you do, I think, see this type of resistance to drug control regimes in many places. So very interesting stuff. We're out of questions in the chat, so if we do have a couple more minutes, if other people have questions they're thinking about, please type them in. I have one question for Pumla that I was thinking about as you were going through your talk. The statistics that you saw in the archives, are there any indications of race in terms of the arrests? Are these only Black Africans being arrested? Are there white South Africans being arrested for use of dagga? Do you have any indication of that?
Yes, there is actually. But I couldn't. Okay, we do have, but not for all of the years. There is a table. There is a report inside the interdepartmental committee reports. There is a table which has the number of people arrested by race. I think it's 1945 to 1951 or something like that. So that's why I couldn't document everything. But I do have that table in my paper. It also, within that table, it shows that a large amount of dagga was seized from African people, and most of the arrests were African people, followed by the colored community, and then by the Asians.
Okay.
Yes, and then the least were the whites. That was the minority of the arrest. But I do have something like that in my research.
Interesting. Another question from Mohammed from Richard Del Rio. He wonders, is there any differing or conflicting opinions between newspapers on the problem of patent medicines or the patent medicine system in Kano?
There seem to be no differing opinion, or rather conflicting opinions, simply because many of these newspapers report what has been dished out to them by the relevant authority. So you find that in most cases, they only report what has been told to them by this drug regulatory agency, the NDA. In fact, even presenting what has not been approved for them by some of this agency may even create a problem for them. So you find that we have quite a number of newspapers, but they only report what has exactly been told to them by some of these drug regulatory agencies. So there is no conflicting opinion, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. 10 o'clock Madison time. Obviously, we have all around the world, which is great to see. So I think I want to thank our two presenters, Mohammed and Pumla, for these very interesting talks about drugs and medicines, pharmaceuticals in the African context, which is it's very valuable contribution to the conference. I do want to give a pitch to one more event today, starting in about 45 minutes, with a very timely talk by Dr. John Grabenstein, who worked on vaccines in the U.S. military and for Merck for a while before his retirement. The talk is entitled Vaccines and Epidemics, Successes and Crises from Smallpox to COVID-19. Certainly a topic we're all very interested in these days, vaccines and COVID. So if you're free in 45 minutes, please. Thanks for all attendees for the great questions, for making this very successful panel. And thanks again to Pumla and Mohammed for your excellent talks.
Thank you.